Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Truergy, also known as Byron of Sidious. This is the first in what will be a brief series of observational pieces regarding J.R.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillion, a work which I honestly should have already read years ago, but only recently finally got around to. Thanks in no small part to my friend at work, Matthew Piper, getting a beautiful hardcover edition of The Silmarillion for me at Half Price Books. It's quite the kind gift, and I deeply appreciate his getting it for me. And so I also blame him for this series of observational pieces because though I had initially wanted to just read it as a fan of fantasy and as someone who has not returned to the works of Tolkien in a very long time, I read the Lord of the Rings trilogy when I was much younger. Back when I was around 21 years old. It's been a long time. And now having a point of reference for much that I likely missed the first time through, having finally read The Silmarillion, I do intend to, in the near future, finally get around to rereading that trilogy with this material in mind. Without further ado, I would like to present for your consideration this observational piece, Running the Numbers. Many are the analyses that have already made note over the years of the significance surrounding the number 7 in J.R.R. Tolkien's foundational world-building work, The Silmarillion. An almost equivalent number of observations have been made surrounding the number 3 in that work. Most literary essays of this phenomena focus on the importance of these numbers in Catholic or Christian theological teachings and writings, a natural tie given the known state of Tolkien's faith. I propose to herein offer an examination of not only how frequently these numbers play a vital role in the details of this text, but draw inferences and implications to other areas of mythological or theological and philosophical relevance as relates to the work within the Silmarillion. I seek to do this because while many analysts have fairly pointed to the likelihood of Catholic instruction and catechism as a source of inspiration for Tolkien's works, they broadly seem to have overlooked that the man was also a skilled linguist and an avid mythologist, regardless of his own personally held ecumenical leanings and understandings. The Sacred 7. The number 7 in Christian theology represents a divine orderliness, a completion of purpose and definition. Commonly understood to stem from Genesis in terms of scriptural origin, it is normally observed with the quotation, "The Lord God made all things in heaven and earth, and on the 7th day he rested." The modern names of the days of the week, granted, are given as stemming from a mixture of Roman and Norse/Anglo-Saxon traditions, but the framing of the calendar's days of the week almost universally come to us from these areas of historical reference. Throughout Tolkien's Silmarillion, the number 7 denotes aspects and details that carry particularly heavy consequence and significance. There are, after all, 7 Valar lords and 7 Valar queens. Alle, in his eagerness to create his own peoples, sculpts what would eventually become the 7 dwarf fathers. Later on in the tale, Fëanor, that proud and ultimately doomed central figure in the fate of the Noldor elves, had 7 sons, who took what I personally refer to as the grim oath of the Silmarils, an oath that very nearly condemns their entire peoples to the unkind depths of unknown oblivion. The accursed lands of Angband, where Morgoth centers his powers and forces, is host to 7 internal realms. The Valar inscribe the skies with 7 stars to form an eternal illuminated sickle challenge to Morgoth, to remind him that his machinations are ever guarded against and will be forestalled and defeated ultimately. When Morgoth faces off in singular combat with the much-praised Fingolfin, the elf strikes precisely 7 lethal blows upon the twisted, rebellious Valar before he is himself smote and laid dead. Notably, he was smashed into the ground by Morgoth's shield 3 times before actually making this final 7th wound. Just before this fateful battle, it should also be noted, Morgoth did not move his forces in their main into Beleriand for conquest until the 7th generation of men had been in those lands. In the tale of Tuor and the fall of Gondolin, the 23rd chapter of the Silmarillion, the number 7 is early on focused upon at least twice. First, when Tuor sees one day 7 swans in flight, he takes this as a divine signal to move back into the mainland and away from the shores of the seas. And within just a few pages of the text, he is noted to have spent 7 years living in a state of honor in Gondolin, when King Turgon grants him the hand of Erdril, his daughter, in marriage. This becomes well noted as the first of only 2 instances of a pairing, romantically, of man and elf throughout the text. Unfortunately, it also seals the quiet hate in the heart of Maeglin, the odd son of Eol, who himself harbors a taboo, incestuous desire for Erdril, who is his cousin. Twice more, I will quickly make note of the overtly intentional mention of the number 7 throughout Tolkien's text. Firstly, the siege of Sauron's stronghold in Mordor, when the Númenóreans, elves, and dwarves, though few in house number, join forces to try and end his dominion. That siege lasted for 7 years. Though successful in pressing his forces back beyond Mordor's borders and ending the threat at the time, it would be only 7 generations before the noble Númenórean peoples became entirely fractured, dividing into smaller, pettier realms and fiefdoms, each one ultimately being felled and broken apart by their enemies among the Easterlings and Orcs. Now, as I mentioned before, there are several mythological ties of import to the number 7, of which Tolkien was doubtlessly aware as a student of various mythologies himself. 7 was the number of lords of King Arthur's Round Table: Sir Lancelot, Sir Gawain, Sir Galahad, Sir Percival, Sir Bedivere, Sir Kay, and King Arthur himself. While legends tell of Arthur's court having hundreds of knights of said Round Table, there were only 7, these 7 who were named as lords of said court. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are 6 bardos, or stages of consciousness, with a 7th bardo in some interpretations referred to as the All, a kind of spiritual pseudo-adoption of Carl Jung's concept of the collective subconscious. In the traditional model of Gnosticism, there are said to be 7 heavens, referred to as the Hebdomad, with a rather unpleasant entity referred to as an Archon, serving as the chief administrator of each sphere. And in the realms of Fey mythology, there were 6 primogen, or primary influences within the Seelie court, with a 7th sphere referred to as the Friends of the Seelie, those who were aligned with them but not officially members of said court. For now, though, let us move on from this potent numerical value and along to the other integer of repute in the Silmarillion. They come in threes. I know, not the best portent to throw out there when discussing such themes of import, but what do you want from an odd duck such as myself? Much like the number 7, the number 3 bears a great significance in theological circles, as well as in philosophical and structural frameworks. It is no different for Tolkien's foundational work here, and in terms of the earliest moments wherein Eru Ilúvatar proceeds with the creation of all things, it bears even greater significance, I would argue, than the Ainur, or the Holy Ones, who would later, upon entering the material realms, be renamed Valar. Eru Ilúvatar asks his great Ainur to join him in the production and singing of the 3 themes, the music that would form the material universe itself, entering the number into this work before even firmly declaring how many of these Ainur would go on to become the 7 lords and 7 queens of the Valar. 3 themes, with which the entirety of creation and its history running forward was to be formulated, including the histories of the world thus crafted, from beginning to unseen conclusion, and possibly beyond. During the course of these themes, the 3 layers of Ea, the material world, would become established. The realms of air, of earth, and of the seas. It should also come as no small thing that the Eldar, the firstborn, known best eventually as elves, would come predominantly in 3 types, those being the Vanyar, or light elves, often associated with air, the Noldor, or deep elves, with their primacy of earth and of gemcraft and woodworks, and the Teleri, or sea elves, those firstborn who love the open waters and whose hearts belong ever to exploration and voyaging upon the waters, living along the coasts. Think ye also upon the beloved races of Ea, those being the elves, dwarves, and man. Doubtlessly, someone will chime in to mention the little people, the halflings, but as would later be strongly implied in later writings of Tolkien, and clarifications from his son Christopher, the race also known as hobbits are themselves an offshoot of man, much as the petty dwarves, such as Mim, were an offshoot of their nobler predecessors, and even the elves had their curious handful of offshoot clans. Given the title of the text itself, there is of course no escaping notice that there were created by Fëanor 3 Silmarils, crafted by combining the light of the 2 trees of Valinor with the master-crafted gem 3 successful times. The ingredients were 2 parts light, 1 part gem. So 3 ingredients, 3 times, for ever more numerical significance. As pertains to the rings of power, which receive almost no mention until even the very end portion of the work, there were exactly 3 such rings which were crafted entirely in secret, free of the taint and corruption of Sauron. Also at the tail end of the book are mentioned the wizards sent by the Valar to Middle-earth, being Saruman, Radagast, and of course, Gandalf, known then as Mithrandas. And the great adventure of Frodo, Samwise, and the rest of the Fellowship that far more people are familiar with, I would ask you this: what age was their quest to destroy the One Ring set within the final days of? Why, of course, it was set in the final days of the Third Age, friends and neighbors. I would be remiss if I did not mention once more the powerful tie to trinities and balances of 3 in other theological and instantiation frameworks, particularly given Tolkien's faith. The most obvious tie would be that of the Holy Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In terms of moral or ethical compasses, there is good, evil, and neutrality, or law, chaos, and neutrality. One should also consider the essences of light, dark, and shadow, or black and white and shades of gray. The realm of psychoanalysis gives us the trifecta of id, ego, and superego, a useful scaffolding for examining the human condition and behaviors of our fellow man, while the legendarium of Celtic and Anglo-Saxon fairy mythos sees that realm and its tales often organized by the peoples and factions within the Seelie court, the Unseelie, and humanity. As a side note, I am well aware that this last example is a massive oversimplification of the Fey realms, and I intend the lore, legends, and spiritual histories thereof no disrespect, nor any toward those who deeply cherish that material. I am myself constantly, if painfully slowly, building more familiarity with the various tales in that specific arena. Literary, liturgical, and mythological areas are not the only ones in which the importance of three shines through, either. Never think it. We can even see this balanced trinity at play in video games, and I don't just mean as in the Candy Crush Match 3 types. Think about The Legend of Zelda, which features the Triforces of power, wisdom, and courage, which, when combined, form an artifact of massive influence and sacredness within the series' structure. In every Pokemon game, from the original Game Boy titles to, well, I honestly don't know if this has changed in entries beyond the Nintendo 3DS, but when players start those games, they are offered a choice of one of three starter Pokemon to select for their training and usage in their adventures. Now, yes, there was one special edition exception to this general guideline, the special Pikachu Yellow edition of the game, which inserted an altered starting sequence at the top of the standard game, resulting in the player beginning automatically with Pikachu as their initial Pokemon. In the Mass Effect games, some player conversational or situational action choices are coded as being couched in one of three personality-type outcomes, being Renegade, red, Paragon, blue, or neutral, uncolored. Perhaps more infamously, of course, there was also the three-color choice ending in the final confrontation of those games, with the choices now being the previous red and blue, as well as green, signifying a sort of pseudo-compromise of organic and synthetic synthesis. Side note, don't look too deeply into the connotations of the fact that you can also unlock a secret refusal ending by equipping Shepard's weapon and firing a single shot at the catalyst projection. That's something to be poked at another time altogether. And let us finally look at an example of the power and wonderment of three in a realm that is very, very tangible, one that needs no theological or mythological examination to understand the beauty of mother, father, and child, the family. This fundamental trio is the one which gives all the others a chance to even be looked at and examined in the first place. And yes, I am aware that some people of sharper faith than myself will question this observation. For them, I would ask simply, how better to display your faith in God than by bringing forth the joy of life into His world? That's going to do it for this specific dive into J.R.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillion, but I would invite you to return for the next one, wherein I'll be examining the theme of pride throughout the work, and its tendency, like in so many of history's greatest fables, to lead to ruin.